Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story. The invitation came in a cream-colored envelope, the kind that screamed old money. My name, Alexandra Carter, was written in my stepmother's perfect cursive, as if the 10 years of silence between us had never happened. Family-only dinner, the note read. The words burned. I hadn't set foot on the Carter estate since the day I left at 22, with nothing but a suitcase and the determination to never need them again. That house, perched high in the Colorado mountains, had been both a prison and a stage. My father, Everett Carter, played the cold, calculating patriarch. Claudia, my stepmother, was the smiling face of manipulation. And Nathan, my older brother, followed in their footsteps like a shadow. Now they wanted me back. I almost threw the invitation in the trash, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe pride, kept me from tearing it up. I wasn't naive. If they were reaching out now, it wasn't for reconciliation. It was because they wanted something. When I drove up the long, winding driveway, the estate looked exactly the same. Sprawling stone walls, perfectly trimmed hedges, windows glowing gold against the twilight. It was beautiful, but it felt hollow, like an expensive set built for a show I no longer wanted to star in. A valet opened my car door. "Welcome back, Miss Carter." I wanted to laugh at that, as if I had ever been welcome here. Inside, Claudia greeted me with a smile so polished it could have been part of the decor. "Alexandra," she said, taking my hands like we were old friends, "you look professional." That was her way of saying I looked plain. I smiled back. "You look exactly the same." Everett was waiting in the dining room, standing at the head of the long mahogany table like a king at court. "Alex," he said, his voice smooth but distant. "It's been too long." "I'm surprised you noticed," I replied. For a moment, his expression cracked. Just a flicker of irritation. But it was gone before Claudia could see it. The table was set for 6, though only the 3 of us were there. I ran my hand over the white linen napkins, the crystal glasses, the silver cutlery. It was all designed to impress, but I knew better. The Carter family's wealth wasn't just about money, it was about control. Over dinner, they played their parts. Claudia asked about my work as a government analyst. Everett made polite comments about my accomplishments, the kind that sounded like backhanded compliments. Every sentence felt rehearsed, every smile like a test. Then Claudia said, "We're so glad you came, Alex. We've been thinking a lot about the future of the family." The future. I set down my fork. "Is this about the trust?" They both paused. That was all the confirmation I needed. Claudia smiled sweetly. "Oh, don't be paranoid. Tonight is just about family. We thought it was time to reconnect." I leaned back in my chair, watching the way Everett's jaw tightened, the way Claudia's hand brushed over his as if calming him. This wasn't a reunion. It was a setup. I woke to the sound of dripping water. My head throbbed like someone had split it open, and my mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. It took me a few seconds to realize I wasn't in my apartment. I wasn't anywhere I recognized. The walls were made of rough wood, the kind you'd see in an old hunting cabin. A single bulb hung overhead, casting a sickly yellow light. I was lying on a narrow cot with a scratchy wool blanket. My shoes were gone, and when I reached for my phone, I found nothing. My pockets were empty. Panic kicked in fast and hard. I sat up too quickly, and the world tilted. My stomach lurched like I'd been spun around in circles. I grabbed the edge of the cot, breathing slow, shallow breaths until the dizziness passed. What the hell happened? The last thing I remembered was the dinner table, Claudia's voice, her syrupy laughter. The way my wine glass was never empty. They drugged me. The thought hit like a gunshot. I stumbled to my feet, my legs shaky and numb. On the small wooden table by the door sat a chipped ceramic mug, still faintly red from wine. I tried the door. Locked. I slammed my palm against it, ignoring the sting. "Hello? Is someone out there?" Nothing. Just the slow, steady drip of water somewhere outside. I looked around the cabin, forcing my brain to work despite the haze. No phone, no bag, not even my ID. A single suitcase was shoved in the corner, not mine. I unzipped it, hoping for something, anything, but it was empty except for a folded note. "Don't fight it." My breath caught. The next few hours, or maybe it was only minutes, bled together. I searched every inch of that cabin, under the cot, behind the stove, even in the rafters. Nothing. The windows were boarded up from the outside. When I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. My face was pale, my pupils blown wide. They hadn't just drugged me. They'd planned this. I tried to think logically, but the fear kept clawing at me. What was their endgame? What was the point of dragging me to some remote cabin in the Rockies? Then it hit me. They were erasing me. I remembered Claudia's casual comment at dinner. We've been thinking a lot about the future of the family. My father's stiff silence. The subtle way she smiled every time I took another sip of wine. They wanted me gone. Not just cut out of the trust. Gone. I found a small radio on the shelf and tried to turn it on, but the batteries were dead. My hands were trembling now, not just from fear, but from something deeper. A sick, crawling awareness that someone had gone through my life, piece by piece, while I was unconscious. What if they'd already reported me missing? Or worse, what if they'd already declared me dead? By the time the sun dipped behind the mountains and the cabin turned cold, I knew one thing for certain. If I stayed here, I wouldn't survive. Somewhere out there, Claudia and Everett were sipping wine in their warm house, pretending to be grieving parents while rewriting the family history. And I wasn't just trapped. I was being erased. It took me 2 days to get out of that cabin. The lock on the door was old, the kind that could be jimmied with enough persistence and a sharp piece of metal. I found a rusted nail wedged in the floorboards and worked it until my hands bled. When the door finally gave, the cold mountain air hit me like a slap. I didn't look back. The nearest town was miles away. I walked barefoot for what felt like hours, my skin torn by gravel and frozen dirt. When I finally stumbled into a gas station, I must have looked like hell. The cashier's eyes widened, but I didn't stop. I asked to use the phone. The first number I called wasn't the police. I knew better than to trust anyone tied to my father's influence in Colorado. Instead, I called the only person I knew outside his reach, Rachel Decker. Rachel wasn't a friend. She was a lawyer I'd met years ago while analyzing financial fraud cases. Sharp, unflinching, and the kind of woman who didn't flinch when facing wealthy monsters like my family. When she picked up, her voice was clipped and cautious. "Alex Carter, I thought you vanished." "They tried to erase me," I said. My throat burned. "I need your help." 2 days later, I was in her downtown Denver office, wrapped in a borrowed coat, looking at documents I didn't recognize, but that bore my name. Rachel flipped through the papers, her brows knitting. "They filed an amendment to the Carter Trust 6 months ago. It states you forfeited all inheritance rights voluntarily. The signature," she tapped the page, "is a near-perfect copy of yours, but it's not yours." My stomach turned. "You're saying they forged my signature?" "They did worse than that." She leaned back in her chair. "They've been preparing to liquidate parts of the Carter Group and move assets offshore. And your sudden disappearance? That's convenient. It clears the way for Nathan to inherit everything without contest." I felt a cold rush of anger. They were never going to stop at cutting me off. "They need me out of the way completely." Rachel gave a slow, grim nod. "They don't just want your silence. They want your existence erased. The trust amendment is step 1. Next, they'll use the staged disappearance to declare you legally dead after a certain period." "They already have a fake death lined up," I said, thinking of that cabin, the note, the feeling of being a ghost in my own life. Rachel tilted her head. "Then we fight back. But we need evidence, proof of forgery, proof of their intent." For the first time in days, I felt something other than fear, a spark of defiance. "Then let's start digging. Because if they want me gone, they'll have to bury themselves first." Rachel's first move was to track down the site of my so-called accident. She had a private investigator dig through police logs, and sure enough, there was a report filed about an abandoned vehicle matching my old car, found burned out along a back road near the Carter estate. "They're staging your death," Rachel said as we drove up the winding road to the site. Her tone was all business, but I could see the flicker of unease in her eyes. "If we're lucky, they left behind something sloppy." The spot was easy to find. Blackened skid marks carved into the asphalt, and a shallow ditch still charred from the fire. A faded police tape fluttered from a branch. I crouched down, the cold seeping through my jeans, and studied the ground. "It's too perfect," I said. "The burn pattern, the single tire tracks, everything about this screams staged." Rachel knelt beside me. "Do you see that?" She pointed at a fragment of metal embedded in the dirt. I pulled it free, my fingers blackened with ash. It was a piece of license plate, from my car. "They're using my car as a coffin," I muttered. She handed me a pair of gloves from her bag. "Put those on. We'll bag this." While she documented the site with photos, I spotted something that made my stomach twist. There was blood spattered along the side of the guardrail. It wasn't much, but enough to make the scene look real. "They're making it look like I died here," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Rachel pulled out a swab kit. "Let's test it. If it's not your blood, we'll have leverage." We worked in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds the crunch of gravel under our boots and the distant rush of wind through the trees. Then Rachel stiffened, her gaze fixed on something farther down the road. A set of fresh tire tracks. She followed them with her camera, snapping photos. The tracks curved sharply, leading toward the woods. As I trailed behind her, I saw it. A single black leather glove, half buried in the mud. I picked it up and froze. It wasn't just any glove. It was Nathan's. I recognized it from years ago when he bought the pair as part of some designer ski gear. "Your brother was here," Rachel said quietly, as if she'd read my mind. The truth sank in like ice water. Nathan wasn't just complicit. He was the one putting his fingerprints on my fake death. I stared at the glove, my fists trembling. This wasn't just Claudia and Everett. Nathan's the one making sure I stay dead. Rachel zipped the glove into an evidence bag. "Then we have our first real crack in their story. And we're going to use it." Rachel always said the Carters were dangerous, not because of their money, but because of their reach. "They own half the town, Alex. If we want to expose them, we need proof they can't buy their way out of." That's how we ended up parked outside a decommissioned military data center at 2 a.m, a place that had once handled high-level government communications. Now it was a private data vault, and one of the Carter Group's subsidiaries. I stared up at the concrete building, its windows blacked out and a chain-link fence circling the perimeter. It looked dead, but I knew better. "You're sure my movement logs are stored here?" I asked, zipping up my dark jacket. Rachel's voice was calm, but I caught the tension in her jaw. When someone disappears, official records are usually the first thing to be wiped, and the access logs to federal databases don't just vanish. Someone ordered it. My contact traced the deletion request to this facility. I had done intelligence work for years, but I never imagined using those skills against my own family. The fence wasn't hard to breach. Old lock, no cameras on the west side. I slipped through, crouching low, until I reached the rear loading bay. I pulled out the small card scanner I'd borrowed from a federal contractor I still had favors with. It beeped once, and the door slid open with a metallic groan. Inside, the place smelled of dust and ozone. Rows of servers hummed faintly, their lights blinking like quiet sentinels. I pulled on a pair of gloves and headed straight for the main terminal. Come on, I muttered, typing commands with muscle memory I hadn't used in years. Within minutes, I was staring at my own movement logs. Federal security data that tracked my ID card swipes, travel records, and flight manifests. The entries stopped abruptly 3 days ago, the night of the Carter family dinner. After that, nothing. It was as if I'd fallen off the face of the earth. I dug deeper, pulling metadata, and that's when I saw the access logs. Deletion request, user ID, CLD Carter Group Claudia. My throat tightened. It wasn't enough that she tried to remove me from the trust. She'd bribed someone inside a government-linked data vault to erase my identity. I copied the deletion logs onto a USB drive, but I needed more. Evidence of tampering wasn't enough. I had to show intent. I found a series of encrypted emails linked to Carter Group accounts. Using a script I'd written years ago, I cracked open the headers. There it was, a digital paper trail of money transfers from Carter Group Holdings to a shell company. The same company that had contracted this data center. They hadn't just paid for my disappearance. They'd bought the system that made it possible. A sound echoed in the hallway, a heavy door slamming shut. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Someone was here. Footsteps. 2 sets, maybe 3. I yanked the USB from the terminal, stuffing it into my pocket. Without thinking, I killed the lights on the server I'd been using and slipped between the rows of machines, crouching low. The voices were muffled but unmistakable. One of them was Nathan. "She's gone," Nathan was saying, his tone sharp. "Dad wants confirmation, no loose ends." My heart pounded so hard I thought they'd hear it. I inched toward the emergency exit, every movement deliberate and silent. I didn't breathe until I was back in the car with Rachel, gripping the USB like it was the only thing keeping me alive. "You got it?" she asked, eyes scanning my face. "Oh, I got it," I said, staring out into the dark mountain road. "And now I know who's pulling the strings. Claudia thinks I'm dead. But she's about to find out I'm a ghost with receipts." Rachel was relentless once we had the digital proof. "We have enough to start a fire," she said, scrolling through the files on her laptop. "But if we want to burn the whole house down, we need a matchstick, something physical, undeniable. The Trust Amendment." The Carter Family Trust was legendary in Colorado business circles, a sprawling web of assets and investments worth hundreds of millions. To be removed from it illegally wasn't just betrayal, it was fraud on a scale that could land someone in prison. We both knew Claudia's signature would be flawless. She'd spent her whole life perfecting deception. But corporate documents meant paper trails, and paper trails meant witnesses. That's how I found myself walking into the Carter Group headquarters under a borrowed ID and a different haircut. I felt exposed the moment I stepped into the glass lobby. Everything was pristine. Marble floors, gold-plated elevator panels, and employees who looked like they'd been handpicked for their loyalty. I wasn't there to talk to anyone in power. Instead, I headed straight to the records department, a quiet floor that smelled like old paper and toner. That's where I met Danny Nguyen, a mid-level archivist who looked like he'd been pushed aside by Claudia's inner circle years ago. He recognized my last name immediately. "You're one of them?" he asked, lowering his voice. "One of the ones they don't want around," I said. "Look, Danny, I'm not here to make trouble for you. I just need the original trust amendment from 6 months ago, the one Claudia signed removing me." His eyes shifted nervously toward the security camera. "I could get fired for even letting you look at that or two," I said, pulling out my phone. "You could help someone who's been erased. I know Claudia pushed you out of promotions. I know she blames you for that audit that wasn't your fault. You're not her favorite. I get that. Neither am I." Danny hesitated, then sighed. 10 minutes. When he came back, he slid a thick folder across the table. "I didn't see anything," he said. Inside was the document I'd been waiting for. My name was there in bold. "Alexandra Carter hereby relinquishes all rights to the Carter Family Trust." But the signature at the bottom made my skin crawl. It looked like mine, but it wasn't mine. I'd never signed anything that clean in my life. I snapped a picture and looked up at Danny. "Can I take this?" He shook his head quickly. "If that's gone, they'll know I helped you." But he slid over another sheet. "I made a copy for insurance." I grinned. "You just became my favorite Carter Group employee." Back at Rachel's office, we laid the copy next to samples of my real signature from government contracts. Even a quick glance showed the differences. The forged version was too smooth, too deliberate. Rachel leaned back, her eyes cold. "This isn't just forgery. This is corporate fraud on a level that could take down Claudia, Everett, and Nathan. We need to get ready for the next step, a strike they won't see coming." Rachel thought I was crazy when I suggested it. "A dinner with them?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. "Alex, we're holding enough evidence to crush them in court. Why would you want to sit at the same table as these people?" "Because they think I'm still powerless," I said. "I want them to feel it before I take everything away. I want them to know I'm not afraid anymore." The restaurant I chose was one of Denver's most exclusive, neutral territory, somewhere public enough that Everett and Claudia couldn't risk a scene. I made the reservation under a different name, then called them with a message that left no room for refusal. "Dinner. All of you, 7 p.m. You'll want to hear what I have to say." I arrived first, wearing a simple black dress and my calmest smile. When they walked in, Everett stiff in his tailored suit, Claudia gliding behind him like she owned the room, and Nathan looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, I could feel their tension. "Alexandra," Claudia said, sitting down. "This is unexpected." "I'm full of surprises," I said, folding my hands on the table. For a while, we exchanged polite words over wine and expensive appetizers. Claudia played the doting stepmother, Everett feigned curiosity about my new job, and Nathan avoided eye contact. It was all theater, until I pulled a small USB drive from my purse and placed it on the white linen tablecloth. This, I said evenly, contains enough evidence to bury the Carter Group. Forged trust amendments, data deletions, off-the-books accounts. You've been sloppy. Everett's jaw tightened. What is this supposed to be? A threat? A preview, I said, leaning forward. I know everything, and I know Nathan's part in staging my so-called accident. Claudia's mask cracked, just for a second. Nathan shifted in his chair like he'd been slapped. You're paranoid, Everett said, but his voice was thin, strained. Maybe, I said with a shrug. Or maybe I'm the ghost you thought you buried, and I've come back with receipts. I stood, leaving the USB on the table. Enjoy dinner. That's just a sample of what I'm holding. Next time, I won't be so polite. I walked out without looking back, but I knew they were shaken. For the first time in years, I was the one holding the knife. 2 weeks after the dinner, we filed the suit. Rachel moved fast, drafting an airtight petition to challenge the trust amendment and expose the fraud behind my so-called death. She wasn't just confident, she was ruthless. We'll corner them in court, she said, and force them to show their true faces. The courtroom was crowded on the morning of the hearing. Reporters had already caught wind of the case. The Carter name carried too much weight to stay quiet. I sat beside Rachel at the plaintiff's table, my hands steady despite the storm brewing in my chest. Across from us sat my family. Everett was dressed like a statesman, his suit immaculate, his expression cool but pale around the edges. Claudia's smile looked painted on, and Nathan refused to meet my eyes. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and zero patience, scanned the documents Rachel had filed. Ms. Carter, you claim this trust amendment is fraudulent. You're alleging forgery and coercion at the hands of your own family? Yes, Your Honor, I said clearly, my voice carrying in the quiet room. And I have proof. Rachel stood, walking the judge through the evidence like a master chess player. First, the original trust documents, signed when I turned 18. Then, the amendment Claudia had filed 6 months ago, with my signature on it. Finally, Rachel placed a stack of samples of my verified government signatures beside the amendment. Notice the differences, Your Honor, Rachel said, pointing with a slim pen. The loops are tighter, the angle is sharper, and even the pressure marks don't match. We've also had this reviewed by a forensic handwriting expert, who concluded with 99% certainty that this is a forgery. Claudia shifted in her seat, but Rachel wasn't finished. She pulled out another piece of evidence, a recording. Your Honor, this is a voice memo obtained from my client's family home. Rachel pressed play. Claudia's voice filled the courtroom, cold and unmistakable. We'll cut her out. It's cleaner this way. Everett, once this amendment is filed, Alexandra doesn't exist anymore. She's already gone. Gasps rippled through the room. I looked directly at Claudia. For once, she couldn't muster a smile. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Carter, would you like to explain this? Claudia's lips parted, but no words came. Everett's hand tightened on the table like he wanted to silence her. Rachel went in for the kill. Additionally, Your Honor, we have digital evidence of illegal data deletions from federal systems, all traced back to the Carter Group, directly linked to efforts to declare Ms. Carter deceased. We have payment records, IP logs, and more, all of which will be entered into evidence. Nathan finally looked at me, his face pale as a ghost. The judge leaned forward, her tone cutting. This court finds the evidence compelling. The amendment to the Carter Family Trust is declared null and void. Furthermore, this court orders an immediate inquiry into the actions of Nathan Carter regarding the alleged staged accident, as well as the data tampering involving Carter Group holdings. The room buzzed as reporters scribbled furiously. I sat back, the weight of a decade lifting from my shoulders. Everett's jaw was tight with fury, Claudia's eyes were glassy with rage, and Nathan looked like he was already halfway to prison. For the first time, the truth wasn't just mine to carry. It was on the record. The court ruling hit the Carter Group like a bomb. Within 48 hours, the press had latched onto the story. Forged documents, a staged disappearance, and whispers of corporate corruption buried deep within the company's billion-dollar empire. Rachel was one step ahead. We're not just exposing them, she told me as we reviewed the next steps. We're dismantling their entire facade. She leaked a carefully curated packet of internal evidence to a trusted journalist. It wasn't everything, just enough to spark outrage and trigger a broader investigation. Financial records, offshore transfers, and details of the forged amendment made the front page of every business news site in the country. By the end of the week, Carter Group's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. The company's stock plummeted 15% overnight. I watched it all unfold from the shadows. I wasn't about to face the cameras or play the part of the prodigal daughter. I wanted them to burn on their own, without my face attached to the fire. Claudia tried to make a public statement, standing on the steps of the corporate headquarters with her pearls and perfectly tailored suit. "These are baseless allegations," she said, her voice smooth but strained. "The Carter family stands united." But the board wasn't buying it. They'd seen the proof. Rachel had made sure of that. An internal audit leaked days later showed years of financial mismanagement, shady payoffs, and aggressive schemes to hide the family's abuses. I got the call late on a Thursday. "They're out," Rachel said. "The board just voted to remove both Claudia and Everett from their leadership roles. Nathan's been suspended indefinitely pending the criminal investigation." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just let the words sink in. For years, I'd imagined walking into that estate and screaming at them for what they'd done. I'd imagined the moment I could finally make them feel small. But now, I didn't need to scream. The world was doing it for me. In the following days, news outlets tore the Carters apart. Old associates came forward with their own stories of betrayal. Former employees revealed everything from shady tax evasion schemes to ruthless intimidation tactics. Claudia and Everett retreated into silence, their public statements reduced to vague legal disclaimers. Nathan, according to the news, had gone underground while lawyers tried to negotiate a deal before charges dropped. Meanwhile, I stayed out of sight. I wasn't the story, not anymore. I was just the ghost in the machine, the shadow that started the chain reaction. Rachel called it a win. I called it freedom. The last time I saw Nathan was in a county jail visiting room. He looked smaller than I remembered. His sharp suit and arrogant smirk replaced by a drab orange jumpsuit and hollow eyes. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me through the glass like he couldn't decide whether to hate me or beg me for help. "You came," he finally said. His voice cracked, just barely. "I'm not here to save you," I replied. My tone was even, but inside I felt the weight of everything. The years of silence, the betrayal, the near death they orchestrated. "I just wanted to hear you say it." "Say what?" "That you knew, that you helped them erase me." His jaw tightened. I didn't have a choice. "Yes, you did." My hand pressed against the glass, steady. "And you made it. I'm not here to forgive you, Nathan. You'll have to live with what you did, and what you lost." He looked away. I picked up the phone. "I hope, for once in your life, you start telling the truth. Because I won't be back." I left before he could respond. I didn't go back to the Carter estate. I couldn't. There was nothing left for me there. Instead, I packed a small bag and drove west, away from the mountains, away from everything. Before I left Colorado, I stopped at the old family chapel. It wasn't about religion, it was about closure. I placed 2 small envelopes at the altar, one for Everett, one for Claudia. Neither contained words of forgiveness, just a few black and white photos of the girl I used to be. The one they buried under lies, and a note that said simply, "You don't own me anymore." I bought a cabin in northern Oregon, tucked into the woods where the fog rolls in each morning and the world feels quiet. The first few nights were strange. No sirens, no footsteps, no whispered plans to erase me. Just the sound of rain tapping on the roof and the occasional howl of wind through the trees. I chopped wood, cooked my own meals, and watched the news from a distance. The Carter Group was still crumbling, a slow implosion of greed and lies. Every week there was another headline. Carter Board announces restructuring. Ongoing investigations reveal years of fraud. Claudia Carter under federal scrutiny. I didn't smile when I saw those headlines. I didn't need to. I'd already won. One morning I brewed coffee and stood by the cabin window, watching the mist roll down the mountainside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to strike. I was free. The echoes of my past would always exist. The Carter name, the estate, the scars of betrayal. But they no longer defined me. I was Alexandra Carter, and I'd survived them all.